Hello and welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I made the logo or Chibi character in the thumbnail. I come from a more realistic art style background, so I often sculpt and texture for film quality as opposed to game or more animation-like quality. So I thought to myself, I already have these very realistic renders. How can I leverage the power of stable diffusion to create a more stylized type of artwork? After playing around with Stable Diffusion and its many models and hypernetworks provided by the community, I've come up with a workflow that fits my own use case. To create your own vector logo, you'll need two mandatory components and one optional procedure. First, you'll need renders of your subject captured from multiple angles. For me, I'm using a 3D model of a jester mask I created in the style of the Italian Volto Venetian mask. I sculpted it in ZBrush, textured it in Substance Designer and Painter, and rendered most of it in Blender's Cycles. There's one render from Maya and Arnold. The second thing you will need is an animation-like model, such as Anything V3. This is the model that I'll be using. You'll also need this hypernetwork created by the user Toru8p or Toru8p on Civet AI. It's named Waven Chibi Style. The purpose of the Anything V3 model is that you want to train the model on your subject, then prompt it so your subject receives the animation-like style. The last optional component that you will require is Adobe Illustrator and specifically its powerful image trace functionality. The purpose of using this software is to convert your final design into a vector image that has limitless information as opposed to the pixel-restricted nature of raster images. Feel free to skip this if you don't want a vector image, but I suggest creating a vector as it has many applications such as After Effects animation or SVG usage on the web. First, I'm going to show the Blender scene and renders from different perspectives. As shown in my Blender scene, I've set up orbiting cameras at 45-degree intervals and rendered from several different angles including orthographic, aerial, and bottom-up perspectives. I want to mention now that having renders shot from the rear perspective view proved extremely detrimental once I tested the DreamBooth Anything V3 model. So I recommend not using any images from the rear view in your DreamBooth trained dataset. I've properly set the exposure on the mask renders as well as color corrected them in Photoshop by reusing and copying a layer group of adjustments. Once I have my final renders that I'm happy with, I crop them using Burmy or Berm as always. Next, if you want to locally train Anything V3 like I do, you'll have to git clone the repository so you have the diffusers files. This is pretty troublesome as it's an 80 to 90 gigabyte repository. The reason for this is that there's multiple versions of the Anything V3 checkpoint file. There's no way to git clone specific files or directories, so if your internet download speed is slow, I feel condolences for you. Also, if git cloning doesn't clone all the files for you, you might have to enable git large file storage or git LFS. I've provided a link in the description on how to get it installed. Now that I've cloned the repository to my local machine, I place it in my Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 location. The training process is pretty similar to my previous videos like the DreamBooth for Style video, or Stable Diffusion for meme art. For reference, this is the script that I'm using. Instead of training for style, I'm training on subject again, much like the Stable Diffusion for meme art video. One thing I want to draw attention to is that I originally trained using the class prompt of a mask instead of a boy. However, I think the mask tag inside Anything V3 is too powerful or too constrained to being a mask on one side or on top of someone's head. So the DreamBooth training wasn't able to project a mask onto someone's face, which is strange. However, I ended up changing the mask or a mask to the class prompt of a boy and receive something very usable in the end. Before I jump into the Stable Diffusion web UI, I'm going to talk about two kinds of workflows. They're similar to each other, but the order of operations is reversed. Basically, the first method is to use text to image to generate a stylized anime image. Then, you take this image into image to image and process it using the hypernetwork I mentioned above with the low mask conditioning strength and denoising. This way, you can slowly turn your image into a more vector-style artwork with anime proportions. The second method is to start prompting right away with the trained model with the hypernetwork enabled. Then, you can start prompting until you get something you like. This might be more useful if you want a super stylized image right away, like so. Also, before I start the demonstration, I want to mention that I've trained two different Anything V3 models with my own gesture mask. The only difference is in the instance prompts. In one of them, I have an illustration of the token name, and in the other one, I just have the token. Anyway, here we are in the good old Stable Diffusion web UI again. I've already tested out some samples and settings and decided on a simple prompt to go with. It has finished. We can open up this text to image grid and check it out. In the top left image, you have this character sitting and it's wearing the mask, but it's been refactored into a crown. And it seems like the rest of the mask has become an aureole, which is interesting. In the middle image, in the very center, you can see the mask is reproduced pretty well in the background, and there's a character. And finally, the last example is the bottom left, where the mask has been reproduced pretty faithfully. I would say it's pretty complex in the first place as a sculpt, but it managed to capture the salient features decently. And then you have the other images. I actually think this last image is pretty cool, but yeah, I'm going to keep generating and see if I get anything else that I like. I've found a seed and an image that I liked, and it's, if I open up the text grid, it's this first image. So I'll open that one up. This one in particular, I think this is very expressive, and it's not only a mascot now, but it's turned the mask into a character, and it still keeps the mask features decently enough. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image into image to image, but I'll also be using a different model. So first I'll send it to image like so, and I'll be using a different model as I mentioned before, but I'll show you how to create this model. If you go to the checkpoint merger, I am actually merging the inpainting model with my own custom DreamBooth model, Anything Gesture V1. And in my tertiary model, I'm just going to keep the V15 pruned. So just vanilla Stable Diffusion 1.5. Make sure when you rename it to keep inpainting at the end. And just follow these settings, multiplier of 1, add difference, checkpoint, or save tensors depending on your preference. And make sure to have don't in your copy config. I tried it with A, B, or C, but somehow there was like a YAML file that was generated which messed up the channels on the inpainting. So yeah, don't do that. Now I'm in image to image with the character and mask of my choice. And first of all, in the top left, I'm going to change the model to the actual model I want to be using for inpainting, which is the Gesture V1 inpainting model. Wait for that to load. And then I'll change my sampler from Euler A to DPM++ 2M. I'll change the seed from the seed I picked back to -1. Inpainting conditioning mask strength, make sure it's at 1. And for the rest of it, I'm going to open up script, go to Outpainting Mark II. For now, I want to expand upwards and downwards. However, I'll start with upward or downwards for now, just to make sure. And yeah, I think I'll put denoising strength to 1 as well and click generate. Ideally, this will expand downwards and create new information like so. So you can see that it's painting in the hand and then giving it some kind of tunic at the bottom. Now I will go ahead and outpaint upwards. And yeah, so if I do it like that, my generation upwards also works. So I wasn't super happy with what I was getting on the bottom, so I'll just do a few batch generations and see what outpainting downwards gives me. Okay, and now if I open up this grid, there's several options to choose from. If I don't like any of them, I could just keep generating. So what composition do I like? Just keep going, I guess. So the generation has finished on the second try, and I think I like the 7th image the best. Yeah, it's okay, but since I'm on an inpainting model, I can always fix up what I don't like. So I guess I'll send it to image again. I have new resolution here. And let's see, why not expand upwards this time instead of downwards, just to give a sense of what's going on. So I want to fill in the rest of the top up here. Go with batch of 8 again, batch size of 8. And now I open up the grid and I have several versions of outpainting upwards, and I just choose the style that I like. So this is where your eye really comes into play. Which one will I go with? It's looking like 8 actually. 7 or 8. 6 is also pretty good. Okay, I think 8 it is. So let's send this to image again. This is our new image. And now you can decide if you want to clean up the details now or just keep outpainting downwards to get a full character. It's really up to you. I'll probably show a time lapse of the process of what I'm thinking. So yeah. At last, the hard part is more or less over. If you want to see the complete process of filling in the rest of the character starting from the bust, you can look at the separate time-lapse video linked in the description. Now I'm going to stylize this illustration a bit more using the hypernetwork I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So first, as a good rule of thumb, don't forget to actually put in your image to image. Next, make sure you're back on the trained version of your model. Right now it's on the inpainting version, which I don't want. I want to go back to my trained version, which is called Anything Gesture V1. And next, once that model is loaded in, you want to go to settings and make sure you enabled one of the 2 hypernetworks. It's either Toru 8P, etc., and then it ends with an A, or the other one ends with a B. Both of them give pretty decent results, so pick the one you like. I'm using A, and then afterwards click Apply Settings to change the hypernetwork. Next, go back to your image and use the same prompt that you used for text to image. For me, it's this one, an illustration of my token, and then one boy with the parentheses. And for my bad prompt, or my negative prompt, I have bad prompt version 2 and sketch by bad artist. And before I run the image to image, I'm going to make sure the settings are all in order. So DPM ++2M 35 steps. Make sure you're using the correct resolution. So I recall this is 640 on the width, and I think 14 something, 1408. I think that's right. And then there's two more parameters you need to be sure to change. First is enpainting conditioning mask strength. This one I found that setting it around to around 0.4 is pretty good. And then for denoising strength, actually I got it reverse. So for conditioning mask, I put it at 0.2, and then denoising strength, I put it at 0.4, like so. And I'll change my batch size to 8 and generate. I should be getting more stylized results now. Okay, so the generations are finished. We can go ahead and take a look at the grid. If you look at the results, you can see there's a big, or not a big, but more of a subtle difference. It feels a lot more cell shaded now. And yeah, this is basically the procedure. You can adjust accordingly to get something you like. I can run it again, and it's just a process of elimination and compositing now. So I'll click generate once more. And this is the second set of generations. They're all like pretty similar because the conditioning mask strength is low. If you're feeling more adventurous, you can turn the strength up a little bit more, but that means you'll be getting more divergence in the pose and whatsoever. And I think I'm going to stay with these settings and just keep generating until I get something I like. If you're curious about what the end result looks like, this is it. So if I start with my original image, I have this very more saturated one. And then I have a series of compositing layers sampled from different image-to-image generations. And these are the outputs from the Stable Diffusion web UI using the hypernetwork. So this is the first one. So it's first of all the base overall change. Then on top of that, I changed the shoes out to something that covered the feet because I think that aesthetic looks nicer. Next, I had this other layer that changes the side of the left hand of the character. I didn't really like how it was portrayed. And then lastly, I changed the face and part of the helmet, like so, or the mask, I should say. So it's just very subtle compositing using the soft round brush or the airbrush. And now I'm here. Lastly, I think I might do some color correction before sending it over to Adobe Illustrator. So here I am in Adobe Illustrator. This is the 2023 version, I believe. And if you've never ever used Adobe Illustrator before, it's kind of weird, but I'll be going through the very basics of it. So first, if you want to start off, you need a document. So File, New, and I'm going to create a 7,000 by 7,000 pixel square document. It's pretty big. So I have my document here now, and I need to bring in my PNG or my JPEG file. I have a PNG. Normally you can bring it in with File and then go down to Place, or you can use the hotkey like I do, Shift Control P. Now I've brought up my File Explorer, and I'm going to choose Final Chibi 01, which is the image I want. I'll put it in here, or place it in. As you can see, it's pretty small because this document is so ridiculously large, but there's a reasoning behind the madness. To expand this, I want to press the hotkey F, and then I want to shift drag on this to make sure it becomes the size I want it to be. So once more, shift drag, whoops. And then if you want to select, just press A, so you have this white arrow, and now you have the image in the place you want it to be. Next, I want to run the image trace function on this. To find this function, you can go to Window, and there should be an image trace here. It's under History and above Info. So press that, image trace. And for this, there's a number of ways you can go about it. For me, while there's a high fidelity photo option, I'll just click on it and you can see what happens. It's doing all of that stuff right now. And you can see that it is, how can I say, it is transforming it into some kind of vector. You can see there's a transition between the different areas if you zoom in. But this seems really blotchy to me. So I usually don't go with high fidelity photo. If you go with low fidelity photo, like this, you get a more pleasing gradient, if that makes sense. You can see that it's not splotchy anymore, and it feels a lot more cartoonish or logo-ish, if that's a word. So I usually like to go with low fidelity photo. And here you might wonder that what you have to do next, because this part is grayed out. Normally you want to trace, right? But now the tracing is done. What do you do? Great question. This frustrated me a lot when I started using Adobe Illustrator. So to solve this, you want to go to Object, and then there's the option here called Expand. Click on Expand, and I think default will be fine. And there we go. Now we have all our paths laid out like so. And if there's parts of the image that we don't like, well, we have to go in and remove it now. So let's get to it. We probably don't want the background. If you do want the background, then you're done. If you don't want the background, we have a little bit more work to do. So make sure you are on the direct selection tool. So A, click what you don't want, delete. Click what you don't want, delete, like so. So you get the idea. If we want the complete vector without the background, so this is no choice. This is how you do it. And if you're smart, you can section off in a way such that you can get everything like that. And yeah, since because you went with low fidelity photo, it's easier to get the stuff that you don't want. Usually it's if it's high fidelity photo, selecting and deleting is a little nightmarish. But yeah, and here is your vector, and if you're happy with it, you can export it as let's see the export options. File, export. Yeah, you can have export for screens, export as, or save for web legacy. I think any of these will work. And I'll just see what I want to go with as an example. So look how clean and nice it is. And the save options I showed were for rasterized images, so for PNG, JPEG. If you want to save as a vector file, you just go to File, Save As, and down here where it says Save As Type, Adobe Illustrator.ai, you have your SVG, good old SVG, or SVGZ. So those are the two ways you can get a vector out from here. So I think I covered everything that you need, and I'll just go back to deleting the backgrounds here. And once you have something you're happy with, there you go. This is probably what I'm going to end up with, or something very close up to what I want. Maybe I don't want that little splotch. Yep. Okay. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.